possibly the richest man who ever lived on this planet, is at the end of his life, he's had everything. He had the power, he had the education, he was the wisest man on the planet, right? He had the power, the wealth. There's none that can compare to him. Yet at the end of his life, he says it was all meaningless, right? There was no, he had everything, he had all the pleasures too. He didn't deny himself of anything. And he basically, if you had the standard of personal growth, that was him, right? There was nothing that he didn't have, and yet at the end he still says it was all meaningless, you know? So the main thing, he'll later go on to say there was nothing wrong with anything that he did. But like when people just tend to focus on this, is that then you realize that all of it in the end is just going to be meaningless, right? So then let's go ahead and move on to the next step. What then he transforms himself is that all of those things that we look for in life, they are going to be meaningless, but God doesn't say they're wrong. He later on says on Ecclesiastes 3:12 through 11 that God actually wants us to enjoy life, right? But there's a difference between what is like knowing the difference between just focusing on that, or like he later finds out, is that we should put our control and our trust in God first and foremost. That the very foundation of before we can do anything in life is that we create a spiritual growth with God first, right? Because as we're going to read on, is that he came to realize that none of it is everything is pointless unless you have the guidance and wisdom of God with you. And you can't like if you have all that power, all that fame, all that success at the end of your road, what are you going to do? You're just going to leave it here. So what good was it? It's just left to, he mentioned, it's just left to the next generation to do whatever you've done, and it's just going to get passed on to the next generation, right? So it's all meaningless unless you have that growth. The most important one of everything is the spiritual growth, right? So in order, before we start anything in this life, we have to put our trust and security in God. And basically, that's where I was talking to Dee about it the other day, is that in order for us to grow, we have to first have a solid foundation, right? So that's why I just wanted to go ahead and read Psalms. Does anybody, do you have it? Psalms 18:2 through 3, please.
18:2.
Oh, I'm sorry. 18:2 and 3.
Oh, 18:2 and 3. Okay.
Yeah, 2 and 3.
18's El Señor es mi roca, mi baluarte y mi libertador, mi Dios, mi roca en quien me refugio, mi escudo y el cuerno de mi salvación, mi altura inexpugnable. Invoco al Señor que es digno de ser alabado y soy salvo de mis enemigos.
See, David was speaking there. Basically, he knows that he has he has enemies. David had all his enemies, right? He wouldn't be anywhere if he wasn't on the rock, right? He's on solid foundation. The verse I'm going to read after, I'll go ahead and read this one so he doesn't have to switch up. He later goes on to mention this, Psalms 40:2. He goes, he lifted me out of the slimy pit, out of the mud and mire. He set my feet on rock and gave me a firm place to stand. Basically, the most simplest I can put it is that if you're not in God, you're on, like you said, slimy rock. Slimy ground, right? The second you allow God into your life, you put Him as a focus, you begin to put yourself on solid ground. And before we can do anything in life, we have to put ourselves on solid ground, right? It's like building a house, which we're about to talk about. You won't be able to sustain anything if you don't put yourself on good ground. So that's the very principle. I mean, we could do everything. We can, as we grow, we think of ourselves as, big, strong guys, and, oh, I got money, I got power, I got all this, but what is it all if, one day you get hit by something and you don't have the spiritual growth? What's going to happen to us? We're not going to be able to sustain anything, right? So that's basically where, so that's why I wanted to come down to this. So when you're on a good foundation, So here it goes. So now I wanted to connect the two. Why did I even bring urban growth into this and human growth? So that's why I wanted to show the two, urban growth and human growth. So let's say when your recession or storm, or whatever you want to call it, comes, how will you handle it? Right? How did the Inland Empire handle it when a recession came? It went down the drain. And the whole country, not just but this area specifically, it just went down the drain. Why? Because it was a mess. Other places in the world handled it a lot better than us. Because they're more developed. They knew in advance, you know what, we can't rely only on certain things. So that's a perfect example. And basically now let's convert that to humans. You know, you can be the most educated guy, the most built guy, most rich guy. What happens if you lose your job one day? You know, you're gonna lose basically everything, right? Or like I use some examples. Let's say a family death, illness, financial issues. I even put breakup ups there because that's a big issue. So let's say one of those things ever happened, and you're not developed properly. Let's say you only focused on, oh, I'm the most educated guy. But then when that final thing comes, and let's say you're spiritually developed instead of worrying about the rest, I guarantee you're gonna hold out a lot better than any other guy out there. And I'm sure there's guys here that that have used example. We've all, like, during financial issues or anything like that we put our trust in God, and we're doing a lot better off than the people out there that have to do it too. So that's why I wanted to compare the two. The urban growth and then the human growth, because it's all connected in a way, right? So, like I put it down, if you only just rely on personal physical growth, I put a sign up. It's important to also do that. But it's saying you'll easily get toppled in these areas when actually the storm or recession does come, right? Because we all know that we get hit by storms, right? And metaphorically speaking. So it says, but now if you're on solid rock, that's my last little passage that I want to go over. Matthew 7:24-7, right? So. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rains came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against the house. Yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who builds a house on sand. The rains came down, the streams rose, and the wind blew and beat against the house, and it fell with a great clash. And that was Jesus' words talking about the same basic concept. It's simple. He used the concept of building a house, which is the very fundamentals that we're standing on, right? You have to build it on solid rock. This area is prone to earthquakes, winds. It wouldn't be able to survive anything on that if it didn't have a good foundation, right? So in order to build this house, you have to start with a good foundation. And the same goes for our lives. We can't start anything without having good spiritual ground, the spiritual ground set up. So instead of worrying about building ourselves through wealth, power, which I don't say there's nothing wrong with it, or like trying to get big or like physically grow, I guarantee you those won't hold up against what we can do to spiritually grow. There's no doubt about it in my mind that if you're spiritually set on good rock, that when that storm does come, when those winds do blow, and they do blow a lot, you'll be good to stand up. And so basically, let's just take that lesson that Solomon, the man who had everything, and at the end of his life, the most wisest man, he came up with that. He's like, it was all meaningless. He calls it vain. It was all vanity, because yeah, it's all good, but if you're not in God, if you're not, the wisdom doesn't come from above, then it's all meaningless. So the main focus is, of course, He does want us to enjoy our lives and to have a very blessed life, but if we're not even on the solid ground, then it's all meaningless. So basically, that's what I said. So I just want to read that last little bit. So let us learn from Solomon and learn that a search for a good quality of life and growth begins with a life under the control of God. And this is the last slide I have here. It goes, God is our security, yet we are full of insecurities. We must allow ourselves to be placed on the rack and know our lives are in His control. then we can truly start living. Let us learn to place spiritual growth before all others. I think like that basically sums up everything. You know, let us put our spiritual growth before anything else. You know, so and then if anything comes, you always be ready for anything. Any questions, guys? That was basically it.